So we're back working on this 68 charger. Going to see if I can figure out the wiper circuit today. I've got the OE diagram in all of its glory, and the original wiper switch is not available, so I don't know, and the wire colors that are under the dash don't match the OE, so I'm going to have to try to backwards engineer how this thing is designed and see if we can make that aftermarket switch work. So one of the problems is there's 5 wires in this harness now. I found this other black wire here. That black wire has continuity to ground, so I'm assuming that that's ground. If I use my power probe to put power to the brown wire, it shows continuity through it, and that runs the motor very slowly. Mind you, it probably hasn't run in a lot of years. Now they don't park, obviously. That's low speed, I would imagine. That doesn't do anything on the brown wire. The diagram doesn't show what wire does what. There's a circuit breaker built in here. And the red wire, I don't know, doesn't do anything. So the only one that responds is the brown one. And they operate very slowly. Let's have a look at the schematic. So this is the wiper motor. There's a brown wire, a dark green wire. I'm writing these down. Another brown wire. So there's 1, 2, dark blue wire, 3, 4, 5. And then there's this wire that comes off here and goes back in here, and it doesn't say what it is, but it notes with an asterisk here with tracer. Okay, it's brown with a tracer. That's what that means. But you go to this, follow this, for instance, down to this brown wire here, goes to the bulkhead connector, which is no longer on the car, and then it goes from the bulkhead connector into the inside of the cab wiring. This is engine compartment wiring, and this is cab wiring. So here's F down here, V4 brown, follow that trace, and it goes up to the switch. Now when you look at this switch, it's impossible to tell how that switch works and what circuit is what. So I'm going to try and follow it from the fuse. Hopefully there's a fuse listed on this page here. Here's the fuses, and they're not labeled. Well, I noticed all of the wires going to the wiper motor were listed with a V, V3, V5, V6, V1, and where's V4? But they're all listed with a V, so maybe the wire at the fuse panel is listed with a V. That's E, that's L, that's D, that says heater, that says radio, that says lighter. I'll look around. So it just dawned on me that these will be hot at all time fuses more than likely. Well, the radio wouldn't be. So that's an accessory feed that's got to come. So it might come from the ignition switch, but there's got to be circuit protection in it. This fuse panel has 6 fuses in it. This one is labeled dome stop. This one's labeled emergency flasher. This one's cigar lighter, rear window defogger, heater, and radio. And this is accessory feed coming in. And Q3, I don't know what that's not labeled, and that's not labeled. Looks like that's coming from the dimmer switch. Be nice if the fuses were labeled, but we don't have the fuse cover, we don't have the fuse box, It's got an aftermarket fuse box in it. And yet another variable to this saga is the possibility that the wiper motor, which is significantly aged and appears to be original, could be defective as well. So I'm trying to find online a diagram of the wiper motor, a picture of the wiper motor, and hopefully some circuits. So I found this forum online, and here is a picture of a 68 or 69 Charger wiper motor, and that's definitely not what's in there. I have a funny feeling this has got a different wiper motor because, well, I'll show you. The factory wiper motor probably interfered with the intake manifold on this Hemi now, because it sticks up significantly higher, and that's a different style motor, and it's got custom covers on it. Maybe I'll take that cover off and see if I can get a part number off this thing. So this cosmetic carbon fiber cover, the screws don't come out. There's a bunch of silicone on here. I'm not sure what that is. You know, we could be working with a wiper motor that doesn't work. I'm going to look for a part number on the back of this motor. Maybe we'll get lucky. So it dawned on me that the ignition switch would likely supply power to the wipers because they would shut off with the ignition. So on the actual factory ignition switch, the accessory circuit goes down as circuit Q2 to this splice, and off of that splice is V1. And if you follow V1, it goes to windshield wiper switch. So V1 is the power in. I'm going to write that down. So what color is that V1 wire? B. Now is that black? Is that blue? B. Let's see if we have a V1 circuit at the wiper motor. Okay, so we have V3, V5, V6, V4. So it probably doesn't, it's probably power side switched. Well, here's another optional variable speed wiper motor. Well, that doesn't have any V3, V4, V5, V6. So V1 likely feeds the switch, and then it comes out of the switch that is on a different circuit. If I had the old switch, I might be able to figure out which is which, and I don't even know if they've used the same color wires. I don't know if the wiper motor is any good. Man, this is frustrating. Here's a couple more pictures of the factory wiper motor. That's definitely not what's on there. So it may have been changed because the motor may have interfered with the operation of or interfered with the intake manifold. It also mentions that there's a resistor across there. I don't know if you can see it right there. It's like a ballast resistor, and that's what gives the wiper motor low speed. So, 1, do we have the proper wiper motor? 2, is it actually any good? It looks like a used motor. It could be off a different model. Yeah, this is crazy. I think I'm going to put this on hold for now and go on to the overdrive unit and see if I can figure out why that's not working. So it's a gear vendor overdrive unit, and apparently used to work, but it doesn't work anymore. It's got a overdrive button on the shifter T-handle, and we're going to have to confirm the power supply to it. It's located actually not bad up here. Where is it? Right there. So we're going to confirm the powers and grounds to start with. Yeah. So this bottom wire here is marked 12 volts. It's live. It powers up I may have lost some kind of programming or something. I see the unit is on. Signal generator. I'd imagine the ground is good if it comes on. Okay, well, let's see what they have for diagnostics. So this is all I've got, is this electronics diagram. It looks like it applies to a bunch of different varieties of this overdrive unit. I know the speed sensor is in the transmission, and the speedo works. He didn't mention anything about the speedo not working. Power and ground to this unit are good. I'm going to see if there's a troubleshooting manual online. So I'm on the gear vendor's website for this overdrive unit, and they have application guide, installation, but no installation manuals. Installation notes. I can't find a troubleshooting guide or anything like that. Contact us. Oh, with email, of course. Oh, they have a toll-free number. I'm going to try and call them. So made a call to gear vendors. Put on hold forever. Switched to voicemail and left a message for Dave to call me back. Why they wouldn't have any kind of troubleshooting charts or installation guides on the website is beyond me, but nevertheless they don't. So aside from checking powers and grounds of this unit, I'm sure it needs to be configured, programmed. I can test the solenoid at the transmission down here to make sure that I don't know if it's got battery power to it. The solenoid is a white wire, goes through the firewall, doesn't show that it's grounded. Well, I'm going to lift it up and have a look again. So there's the solenoid on this unit. I'm not sure if it's ground side controlled or power controlled. The harness runs into the cab through the floor. But I assumed there was a speed sensor in here, but there is no speed sensor. This wire is just tied up here with this loom. There's nothing going into the speedometer, so it must use GPS or something for vehicle speed. Probably that gear vendor's unit has got built-in GPS. I don't know. I'll be totally honest, I am not familiar with this unit. Oh boy. Well, I'm going to check this solenoid, make sure it's okay. So I disconnected the wires of the solenoid, put the ohm meter across it, and it reads 5.1 ohms, which would be realistic for a solenoid. Well, I just got off the phone with gear vendors, a fellow named Dave, very, very knowledgeable. Tells me that this unit, if you look at here, it has a date stamp on it, basically like a battery. So that's December, focus, 2002. So this thing is 20 years old. Now the customer, I'm sure, told me that this was working, but I think he had it in a different vehicle. He has no speed sensor on this thing, and that's probably why it's not working. Because when underneath there, I was wondering, how does this pick up a speed signal? Well, it's supposed to have a speed sensor attached to the wiring, but the gearing inside the unit may be incorrect for this vehicle if this unit was installed in another vehicle. So I got to ask the customer some more questions. But the actual switch, the manual control switch here, goes to these two pigtails, and you turn the unit on. You have power on the black wire, and the latch switch on the shifter grounds or sends power back on the second circuit here on the red wire. So that's working. Power and ground is good. Speed signal is what is probably missing. I don't know where that speed signal plugs into. Solenoid, signal generator. Yes, according to this, if he's got that wired into this Dodge transmission, which he may have, that won't work because it's the wrong kind of signal. So that goes from here down to the gear vendor's speedo adapter, and he doesn't have that. Let me see how he's got if there's another speed sensor in the transmission. So I don't know how the speedo in the dash works. It must be GPS or something, but nevertheless I saw this wire going into the floor through this grommet from the solenoid, and I saw this other wire beside it, and I pull it out, and lo and behold, that's probably the speed sensor wires, which are not connected. There's nothing connected to this thing. There's a speed sensor that's supposed to go in there, and according to the fellow I was talking to from Gear Vendors, he said because the tunnel is so close, you may need an adapter harness. So that's likely why this thing didn't work. Now the customer, I'm sure, told me that it was working, but maybe he meant it was working on another vehicle. So on to the engine controls and the potential stalling. Found out that the ECM is way up in here. Look at the wiring on this thing. Butt connectors. There's a wire there hanging with nothing connected to it. These were the wiper switch wires. There's no power because these 5 wires go right to the wiper motor. But I can't find the DLC connector. I know I scanned this thing a couple of years ago when it wouldn't start and the fuel pump wasn't wired correctly. But, oh well, time for lunch. So I found it. It's plugged in and tucked behind the console here. And it has an adapter plugged into it. That's probably connected to that module for the dash, so that it can get some data off the dash, or for the dash. Although I noticed with the key on just now, put it on in a sec, it says please set speed calibration. Now I don't think I changed that when I changed the fuel gauge calibration, but we'll look into it. Let's connect a scan tool to this thing and see what it IDs as. Well, that's a good start. At least we got battery power and ground to the diagnostic connector. So we'll try to auto ID this thing. So let's see if this thing will auto ID. Let's see, do I put it as a Dodge or a Chrysler? Let's try Dodge. I don't know what year it is. I'm gonna guess 14 or something like that. Let's see if it'll auto ID. The 10th character of the VIN, 5, doesn't match your selection, so it's a 15. Let's try re-IDing it. So there is the VIN number. It is a 2015 10th character. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Well, we're not worried about the mileage. And there won't be any other controllers other than the engine controller. So let's see if there's any codes in it. No, the battery's been dead. O2 sensor heater circuit high, O2 sensor circuit heater high, fuel level sensor heater, oil pressure sensor, all of that stuff doesn't exist. Ambient temperature sensor high, battery temperature sensor high, natural vacuum leak detection canister, vent valve, solenoid circuit high. Why wasn't all this stuff programmed out of this computer? Because it doesn't have an evap system, purge solenoid, cooling fan controls. Ambient temperature, well, it's disconnected, it doesn't exist. Oil pressure doesn't exist. Fuel level sensor doesn't exist. The only code that could be relevant here is this heater code, but it probably isn't even wired for the O2 sensor heaters. So let's clear the codes. I'm sure they're going to come back. Nothing related to the stalling condition. I'm sure the cooling fan is standalone control, but I could be wrong. And the 2 temp sensors came back. No, there goes the fuel level. Probably going to take a few seconds for the other ones to set. Let's look at data. So it's IDing it as a 2005 Ram truck. Down here is the ID. Now I'm going to have a look at data, see if I see anything unusual. So I don't see anything out of the ordinary. Coolant temperature and intake air temperature match. 21 Celsius is what it is in the shop here right now. Of course, battery temperature doesn't exist. And ambient air temperature doesn't exist. Intake air temperature voltage is, where is that on this side? 21. So all those temperature sensors agree battery temperature is 5 volts and ambient temperature is 5 volts, which is out of range, because I'm sure those sensors aren't existing. So we're going to get this car so that we can drive it, go for a road test and record data and see if we can get it to act up, install, or do anything. So I calibrated the instrumentation so that the speed signal is off of the bus. Now I realize that you probably calibrate other gauges such as oil pressure and temperature to work off the bus. That's why it was plugged into the DLC down there. But I think they have standalone sending units. Obviously the fuel gauge is standalone. And it really only needed the fuel sender signal into the ECM for evap testing. So I got the console back together again. We're going to take this thing for a road test and see if it'll act up, stall, cut out, do whatever. So it'll be interesting to see when we go for a road test if we have a vehicle speed signal. It's in the data list here. PCM odometer has 8.2 miles on it. Notice also that there is set coast switches, set speed, set coast switch 2, set coast switch 1, set coast lamp. That's cruise control stuff. So the ECM is set up physically to have integrated cruise control because this is drive-by-wire throttle system. And if it was me, I would be trying to get the integrated throttle control to work, provided these brake switches work. So we're going to pay attention to these. We're going to take it out for a road test and record some data while we're on the road test. I've got that connector to the DLC unplugged, so that may disable the speedo. I don't know. That connector could have been for the aftermarket cruise control. There's so many variations of options on this car, it's crazy. So there's the status of the 2 brake switches with my foot off the brake and my foot on the brake. So obviously these aren't wired in, so they would have to be installed, and I imagine that's a normally off, normally on switch, but then why isn't it setting a fault code unless they're both on at the same time? So it thinks the brakes are on. Anyways, we're going to look at well, I'm recording this data now. We're going to take it for a road test. So we got no vehicle speed registering on the scan tool and no speed on the speedo because I think I've got what we need for it to work. Although if it's not reading on the scan tool, I can't see how it would read on here. Transmission shifting fine, but the transmission is totally mechanical. At least I believe it is. Definitely needs an overdrive unit. This is roughly 50 miles an hour. It's about 2,500 RPM. See how the transmission shifts through the gears. Second. Just stopped on the side of the highway to double check the coolant temperature. On the scan tool it's 96 Celsius, and on the temperature gauge it's about 195 to 200, which would be about right. So the temperature gauge is running okay, and the scan data is indicating temperature okay. I don't want to plug in that connector. So I came back from about a 25-kilometer road test. The car ran fine. Maximum temperature reach was 102. Running in the shop here, the electric cooling fans kicked on. They're controlled by standalone switches and relays, not by the ECM. So I'm going to save this recording and just have a look at the data. So to explain some of these codes, Bank 1 sensor 2, Bank 2 sensor 2 heater circuit codes are there because it doesn't have any oxygen sensors. The fuel level sensor is not connected to the actual ECM. Neither is the oil pressure sensor, the ambient temperature sensor, battery temperature sensor. It doesn't have a leak detection pump for the evap or a purge solenoid. So all of these codes are related to things that don't exist, as well as this cooling fan control circuit. And of course, lost communication with the instrument cluster makes sense because it's a standalone instrument cluster. Now, I still haven't established whether or not the speedo actually worked prior. Like I said, it would be unusual that he wouldn't have mentioned that, especially when he wanted me to fix the cruise control. It's probably related. Looking at the data that I recorded, where is it here? Everything looks normal. You can see the maximum coolant temperature hit 102 Celsius, and that's where the fan was cycling on and off. And as I said, the cooling fans are controlled by a standalone system, standalone temp sensors. The two 1 are here. The sensor, Bank 1 sensor 2 is at 5 volts. And that's because it doesn't exist. And the other one should be at 5 volts too. Everything looks normal in the data list here. And of course the car ran fine. Didn't cut out, didn't stall, didn't lose power. And I had it running for, well, I don't know if there's a time on here. If this, how did it get 8.2 miles on it? No, there's no timer, so to speak. Closed loop timer. That's in, yeah, that's just the length of time it takes to go to closed loop, and it was running in closed loop. So I'm going to ask him a couple questions about this speedo. So here's the wiring for the Dakota dash, and it doesn't mention anything about a networked cable for the vehicle speed. It has its own speed sensor that has to be wired in. All of these terminals here are labeled, and none of them go to the DLC. It doesn't mention anything about using CAN bus vehicle speed signal. And this is the cruise control information. And here it says the gray vehicle speed signal wire is how the global cruise knows how fast the vehicle is running. The pulses per kilometer are characteristic of the vehicle, must be set according to the dip switches. It doesn't mention anything about networked as well. So I'm not sure where that connector went that was plugged into that, unless there's some other GPS tracking device or something on this thing. So here's what was plugged into the diagnostic connector, and it's just an OBD2 cable extension by the looks of it. It's not anything to do with gear vendors or anything to do with Dakota Digital Dash, as far as I could tell. www.obd2cables.com. It's just a cable extension, and I tried to follow it, and it goes up behind the console. But I found something else on the other side of the dash. Oh, and by the way, the speedometer didn't work. The customer thought that was because it wasn't programmed. So looking up above this gear vendor's computer here, there is this GPS-50-2, which looks like it has the capability to generate a speed signal. I don't know if there's anything actually physically connected to those terminals. And that's Dakota Digital. So I wonder if that's where the speed signal comes from. Here, this looks like an OBD2 cable here. Sure is. Yeah, this is that's the other end of that cable. Here it is here. Yeah, that's it. So I got to find some more information on this BIM01-2 and this GPS-50-2, because maybe that's what's being used for the instrumentation. Now, it didn't mention that in the manual, but and the gear vendor's speed sensor is definitely missing. So the BIM01-2 is a OBD2 CAN interface. Let's look at the manual for it. I gotta find it. So this GPS-50-2 is also from Dakota Digital. It looks to me, just by briefly what I've read so far, that it's capable of producing speed signals and sending them to other modules based on actual GPS speed. And it uses that other module, that BIM01-2, to connect to the network. So I'm going to set it up on the hoist and plug that module in now, see if the speedo actually works with that harness plugged in, that OBD2 cable plugged into the network. Well, it's been a long day. I was about to lift this vehicle up so that I could test the speedo to see if it was working. And then I realized, wait a sec, it's GPS. It's only going to work if you're outside, picks up satellites, and you're moving. So spinning the tires is not going to work. So we'll put it back down and try again. the speedometer work, but now I realize, or I'm thinking, that that's just an input to the vehicle speed to the ECM, and this instrument cluster should not be set up for a bus signal. So I'm going to try the other options. So let's see. Speed setup. Tack. Volt. Water. Oil. Fuel. Lighting. Set up BIM. Set up display. Set up info. Set odometer. Set up speed. Now press and hold this. Speed sender. Adjust. Service. Done. Sender. Hold it. Bus. I had it on bus. Sender normal. Sender bus. So let's set it for sender normal and see what that does. Cycle the key off. What does that say? Please set speed cal. I'm going to see if it works first. So not only do you have to pick the speed signal input, whether it's normal or bust, and this one would be normal, I take it, you have to calibrate it, and you can auto-cal it, but you have to drive it while you hold the switch, and they put the switches hanging over here on the side of the dash, which makes it very difficult to drive it while you're supposed to drive it over a measured 1 mile distance. I wonder if we can manually calibrate it. So it appears you can manually adjust it, but it also requires that you drive the vehicle while you press and hold and release the buttons. So I'm going to try and see if I can relocate those switches in a more convenient spot. So that didn't work. I managed to go through the process and drive 1 mile and then press the set 1 switch, and it said too low pulses. Now my understanding was when it was in that mode, it was supposed to be indicating or counting pulses, and it was 0 all along that whole mile. And then I got an error message that said pulses too low. So it may be that that GPS module has to be configured correctly. I think the BIM module, which is a bus interface module, that's what BIM stands for, is to output a vehicle speed signal to the CAN bus for the ECM. In other words, if the ECM needed it for, well, cruise control, for instance. But this ECM really doesn't need a vehicle speed signal because it doesn't have cruise, it doesn't have an automatic transmission, and other than over speed warning or over speed limiting, I don't think it's set up to do that. So we're going to call it a wrap for tonight. It's been a long day. Didn't really accomplish much except learning. On the Dakota Digital site, I found a CRS 2000, CRS 3000 cruise control unit, and other than it not having this sticker on here, it has this configuration, and it looks like the cruise module that he has. Again, he has this BIM module, this bus interface module, and he also has this as I was saying, he also has this GPS 50-2 module, which I believe initially produces the simulated vehicle speed based on GPS speed, and then it broadcasts it to the instrumentation and to that bus interface module in order to send a signal to the standalone ECM. So I got to do some reading tonight on how these things are calibrated. This has to be obviously set up correctly. That's it for this evening though.
Yeah, I know I said I was going to call it quits for the night, but went back and looked at that GPS module, and there are no wires connected to speed 1, speed 2, or the cruise terminals. And it's got that bus interface module, but that bus interface module, my take on that is it outputs the signal for the ECM, and the ECM is not integrated into the instrumentation, so it needs wires run to cruise speed 1 or speed 2 where it doesn't have them. That's why I didn't get any pulses out of it. But I did plug in that bus interface module to the network cable from the ECM, and it says 8.2 miles, which I think was what was on it before when I scanned it. And if that was working, it should have actually clocked 8 more miles. So that bus interface module is not working either. It's not outputting a data. That's minor. I don't really care about that. Like I said, the ECM doesn't really need to know the vehicle speed because there's nothing that relies on it. But definitely we need wires connected to the speed 1 and speed 2 for... I wonder if they put that bus interface module in thinking that that would work with the cluster. Or, yeah, it would work with the cluster, and it won't. Oh well.